He was the kind of man everyone trusted. A respected professor. A public figure. The kind of person parents felt safe sending their daughters to learn from. But behind closed doors, he was choosing his victims carefully. One girl at a time. The right personality. The right silence. And for a long time, no one spoke up. Not because nothing was happening, but because he knew exactly how far to go, without getting caught. What he didn't know. One of his students wasn't staying silent. She was watching. Recording. Connecting every detail. And when the moment came, she didn't just expose him. She made sure he watched his own downfall. Live.my name is Isla. 3 years ago, I was 26, and in the middle of my master's degree in journalism. Back then, I thought I understood how the world worked. Truth. Evidence. Exposure. I believed if something was wrong, you just had to prove it. I didn't know yet that sometimes the truth isn't enough. Sometimes you have to build a story people can't ignore. At first, nothing about him seemed unusual. Professor Kareem. That's what everyone called him. He had a reputation most academics could only dream of. Published research. International conferences. Media appearances. Students admired him. Faculty respected him. And that's exactly why no one questioned him. His classes were average. Not terrible, not inspiring. Mostly stories about himself. His success. His connections. His influence. At first, I thought it was just ego. I was wrong. Because the real version of him didn't show up in the classroom. It showed up on those student trips. He organized them every semester. Different countries. Different conferences. Opportunities that felt too valuable to miss. And that's where the pattern started. Every trip, he picked one girl. Not randomly. Never randomly. It was always the same type. Confident. Friendly. Attractive. The kind of person who smiles easily, trusts easily. The kind of person people don't believe easily. And then came the excuse. I'll take your number, just in case something happens during the trip. Simple. Professional. Completely normal, on the surface. But it never stopped there. The messages started late at night. At first, harmless. Then, strange. Then uncomfortable. One girl told me he sent her a video of himself singing. Not jokingly. Not casually. But in a way that made her pause the video halfway through. And never open it again. Another girl said he always made sure to sit next to her. Too close. Close enough that his hand didn't need an excuse. Her knee. Her leg. Always accidental. Never actually accidental. And when the trip ended, it didn't end. Back at university, he watched them. Closely. During class. After class. He'd call them for private meetings. Inside his office. Behind a closed door. No one said anything. Not because they didn't notice. But because they understood the risk. He controlled grades. Recommendations. Future opportunities. One complaint. And your entire career could collapse before it even began. So they stayed quiet. And for a while. So did I. But silence doesn't mean helpless. Sometimes. It means you're waiting for the right moment. The idea came during a normal class assignment. We had to create a short documentary. Any topic. Anything related to student life. Most people chose safe ideas. Mental health. Social media. Campus life. I didn't. I chose something dangerous. Something real. Power abuse in academic spaces. I didn't mention his name. That would have been too easy to shut down. Too easy to deny. Instead, I started building something bigger. A pattern. A system. A story. I collected details carefully. Messages. Timings. Behavior. I spoke to the girls, but gently. No pressure. No exposure. One of them agreed to share her story. But only if she stayed hidden. So I changed her voice. Removed her identity. Kept her truth intact. And slowly, everything started connecting. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was strategy. He knew exactly what he was doing. Who to choose. How to approach. How far to go. Without crossing a line that could destroy him. Or at least, that's what he believed. By the time I finished, it wasn't just a project anymore. It was evidence. Hidden inside a story no one could ignore. A 10-minute documentary. Sharp. Controlled. And dangerously real. I submitted it like any other assignment. No drama. No warning. But I didn't expect what happened next. Another professor watched it. And called it brilliant. So brilliant. He submitted it to an international media festival. And that's when everything changed. Because there was one name on that travel list I didn't expect to see. His, and suddenly, this wasn't just a project anymore. This was a confrontation. Because in a few days, he was going to sit in a dark room and watch a story unfold that was secretly about him. And this time, he wouldn't be the one in control. The flight to the festival felt longer than it should have. Not because of the distance, but because of what was waiting on the other side. I kept replaying everything in my head. Every frame of the documentary. Every line of narration. Every detail I had carefully placed, knowing exactly how it would feel when someone recognized themselves in it. Or worse, when they couldn't deny it anymore. I didn't look at him during boarding. Didn't need to. I could feel his presence the same way you feel a storm before it breaks. Quiet, controlled, but heavy. The kind of silence that hides something underneath. We landed in a city that didn't know anything about us. To everyone there, we were just another group of students and academics attending a media event. Smiling, networking, pretending everything was normal. And maybe that's what made it easier. No one was expecting a story like mine. No one was expecting him to be part of it. The venue was bigger than I imagined. A modern auditorium with soft lighting and rows of seats that seemed to stretch endlessly. The kind of place where stories were celebrated. Where truth was supposed to matter. I remember standing at the entrance for a moment, just watching people walk in. Filmmakers. Journalists. Critics. All of them excited. None of them aware. I wasn't nervous. That was the strange part. I thought I would be. But instead, there was something else. Something colder. Something focused. This wasn't fear anymore. This was control. Inside the hall, everything moved quickly. Names were checked. Seats were assigned. Conversations blended into a low hum that filled the space. And then I saw him. A few rows ahead. Relaxed. Leaning back in his seat like he belonged there. Like nothing in the world could touch him. For a second, I wondered what it must feel like to live like that. To believe you were untouchable. To move through life without ever thinking someone might be watching. Then I remembered. That belief is exactly what makes people like him careless. I walked down the aisle slowly, counting the rows without looking directly at him. And then I sat down. Right behind him. Close enough to notice the smallest movement. Close enough to see everything. The lights dimmed. The conversations faded. And just like that, the room fell into silence. The screen lit up. The first documentary started. Not mine. I barely registered what it was about. My attention kept drifting back to him. The way he shifted slightly in his seat. The way his head tilted when something caught his interest. Normal behavior. Completely normal. Which made what was about to happen even more powerful. Time moved strangely after that. One film ended. Another began. Applause came and went. Names were announced. And then, finally. Mine. I heard it before I processed it. The title echoed through the room, followed by a brief description. Neutral. Professional. Nothing that gave anything away. Perfect. I leaned back slightly, my eyes fixed on the back of his head. This was it. The screen faded to black. And then my film began. At first, everything looked exactly how I designed it. Slow pacing. Soft narration. A general introduction to power dynamics in academic environments. Nothing specific. Nothing dangerous. Just enough to make people listen. He didn't react. Why would he? There was nothing to recognize yet. But then. The pattern started to build. Carefully. Subtly. The way certain professors positioned themselves as mentors. The way boundaries blurred during trips and informal settings. The way communication shifted from professional to personal. Still nothing direct. But the room felt different. More focused. More attentive. And then came the first shift. A description. Not a name. Not a face. Just behavior. A professor who selected specific students during academic trips. Who preferred private communication over official channels. Who initiated late-night conversations under the pretense of concern. I saw it. A small movement. Almost nothing. But I caught it. His shoulders stiffened. Just slightly. The kind of reaction most people wouldn't notice. But I was watching for it. Waiting for it. The narration continued. Calm. Measured. Unemotional. That was important. Emotion makes people defensive. Facts make them uncomfortable. And discomfort is harder to escape. The next segment began. A blurred figure on screen. A distorted voice. Telling a story that wasn't supposed to be traced back to anyone. But detailed enough to feel real. Because it was. The girl described the messages. The timing. The way things escalated slowly, crossing lines so subtly that it became hard to point to a single moment and say, this is where it went wrong. That's how it works. That's how people like him operate. Not with obvious actions. But with gradual shifts. Until the situation becomes something else entirely. I saw his head tilt again. This time, not out of curiosity. Out of recognition. He wasn't relaxed anymore. There was tension now. Not visible to everyone. But obvious to me. The film moved forward. More patterns. More details. Locations. Situations. Fragments of truth placed together in a way that made the full picture impossible to ignore. And then. The turning point. A line in the narration. Simple. Direct. Carefully written. This behavior continues because it hides behind reputation. Silence filled the room. Not the comfortable kind. The heavy kind. The kind where people start connecting things in their own minds. Where suspicion begins to form. Where certainty isn't needed anymore. Because the idea alone is enough. I saw him shift again. This time, more noticeably. His hand moved slightly, gripping the armrest. His posture changed. He wasn't leaning back anymore. He was sitting forward. Alert. Aware. And then came the final segment. The one I spent the most time on. The one I almost didn't include. A breakdown of method. Not just what happened, but how it happened. Step by step. Target selection. Isolation. Private communication. Boundary testing. Normalization. Every stage explained clearly. Not accusing. Not naming. Just showing. And that was enough. Because people don't need a name when the pattern is clear. They find it themselves. The screen faded slowly. The narration ended. And for a moment, there was nothing. No sound. No movement. Just silence. Then the applause started. Soft at first. Then louder. Stronger. Filling the entire hall. I didn't move. Didn't react. My focus stayed exactly where it had been from the beginning. On him. He didn't clap. Not immediately. His hands stayed still. Resting. Like his body hadn't caught up with the room yet. And then, slowly, he joined in. Just enough to blend in. Just enough to not stand out. But it didn't matter. Because the damage wasn't in the applause. It was in that moment before it. The moment where he knew. Not suspected. Not wondered. Knew. I leaned back slightly, letting the noise of the room wash over everything. People were impressed. Engaged. Talking about the film. Discussing the topic. Exactly what I wanted. But this wasn't the end. Not even close. Because exposing a pattern is one thing. Making sure it follows someone. That's something else entirely. And I wasn't done yet. Not even close. Because what I had planned next wasn't just about making him uncomfortable. It was about making sure he could never go back to being the same person in that room again. And this time, it wasn't going to be subtle. If this tone and flow is exactly what you want, say. The applause faded, but the tension didn't. It stayed in the air, heavy and unspoken, like something had changed but no one could fully explain what. People stood up. Conversations started instantly. Opinions, interpretations, praise. I heard fragments around me. Powerful piece. Really unsettling. That felt real. Of course it did. Because it was. But none of that mattered to me. Not the praise. Not the attention. Not even the success of the film. My focus was still exactly where it had been from the beginning. On him. He didn't turn around. Not once. Not during the applause. Not when people started leaving their seats. Not even when someone nearby mentioned the documentary again. He stayed facing forward for a few seconds longer than necessary. Like he needed that extra moment to pull himself together. Then finally, he stood up. Calm. Controlled. The same version of himself everyone else knew. But it wasn't real anymore. I had already seen what was underneath. And so had he. I didn't follow him immediately. That would have been too obvious. Too direct. This wasn't about confrontation. Not yet. This was about pressure. Slow, precise pressure. The kind that builds quietly until it becomes impossible to ignore. The networking area outside the hall was crowded. People moved in small groups, exchanging ideas, introducing themselves, pretending this was just another normal event. I blended in easily. That's the advantage of being invisible before you choose not to be. I picked up a glass of water I didn't need and positioned myself where I could see him without being seen too quickly. He was talking to someone. Of course he was. Smiling. Nodding. Engaging like nothing had happened. But I noticed the details. The slight delay in his responses. The way his eyes moved more than usual. The way his posture wasn't as relaxed as before. Small cracks. But real ones. And then something interesting happened. The person he was speaking to mentioned the documentary. I couldn't hear every word, but I didn't need to. I saw the reaction. A pause. Just a second. Barely noticeable. But it was there. And that was enough. Because now it wasn't just in his head anymore. Now it existed in the room. In conversations. In other people's thoughts. That's how things spread. Not through accusations. Through doubt. I moved closer. Slowly. Carefully. Not directly toward him. Just, closer. Until I was within range. Close enough to hear. Close enough to step in when I wanted to. Really strong concept, the man was saying. Felt very specific. Yeah, he replied, his voice steady. Important topic. Important. That's the word he chose. Not exaggerated. Not dismissive. Carefully neutral. He was already adjusting. Already trying to control the narrative. But it was too late for that. Because I wasn't finished. I waited for the conversation to end. Watched the moment he turned slightly, scanning the room. And then. I stepped forward. Professor Karim. He froze. Just for a fraction of a second. But I saw it. Then he turned. And there I was. Standing in front of him. Calm. Composed. Exactly the way he had always presented himself to others. Ayla, he said. My name. Perfect pronunciation. Like nothing was wrong. Like this was just another student interaction. That was a powerful film, he added. Of course he said that. What else could he say? Thank you, I replied. Simple. Neutral. Controlled. There was a brief silence. Not awkward. Not loud. But heavy. I didn't know you were working on something like that, he continued. I wasn't, I said. Not entirely a lie. Just not the full truth. He smiled slightly. That same practiced expression. The one that worked on everyone else. It's important to raise awareness, he said. Awareness. Another safe word. Another layer of distance. I nodded. Especially when patterns go unnoticed for too long. There it was. The shift. Subtle. But sharp. For the first time since the conversation started. He didn't respond immediately. His eyes stayed on mine. Trying to read something. Trying to understand how much I knew. How far I had gone. How dangerous this really was. But I didn't give him anything. No emotion. No accusation. Just calm. That's true, he said finally. But his voice had changed. Slightly. Enough. And in that moment. He understood. Not everything. Not the full picture. But enough to know. This wasn't random. I held his gaze for a second longer. Then stepped back. Just like that. Conversation over. No confrontation. No scene. Nothing he could react to. Nothing he could defend against. Because that's the thing about control. You don't take it by force. You take it by making the other person realize. They've already lost it. I walked away before he could say anything else. Didn't look back. Didn't need to. But I could feel it. That shift. That weight. That realization settling in. For the rest of the evening, I didn't go near him again. I didn't have to. The damage was already in motion. People kept talking about the film. Discussing it. Analyzing it. Connecting it to real situations. And every time that happened, he was there. In the same space. Hearing it. Processing it. Unable to stop it. That's what made it effective. Not exposure. Not yet. But inevitability. Because once an idea is planted, you can't control where it grows. Later that night, back at the hotel, I finally allowed myself to sit down and breathe. Not out of relief. But because I needed to think. This wasn't over. Not even close. What I had done so far was just the beginning. I had made him aware. Uncomfortable. Uncertain. But I hadn't taken anything from him yet. Not his reputation. Not his position. Not his control. And that's what mattered. Because real consequences don't come from a single moment. They come from what happens after. I opened my laptop. Looked at the files. The messages. The patterns I hadn't used yet. There was more. A lot more. Enough to go further. Much further. But this time, it wouldn't be hidden inside a story. This time, it would reach people who mattered. And once that happened, there would be no way back for him. I closed the laptop slowly, already knowing what I was going to do next. Because the first step was making him watch. The second was making sure everyone else did too. And when that happened, his reputation wouldn't protect him anymore. It would destroy him. The next morning, everything started to change. If you want the same intensity, next escalation, and full downfall build, say, the next morning didn't feel different. That was the strange part. Everything looked normal. The same hotel lobby. The same people moving around with coffee cups and tired expressions. The same schedule printed neatly on screens. But something had shifted. Not outside. Inside. I saw him before he saw me. Sitting alone this time. No conversations. No easy smiles. Just quiet. Focused. Thinking. Good. That meant the pressure was working. I didn't approach him. Not yet. This wasn't about repeating what I did yesterday. This was about escalation. Because awareness creates discomfort. But uncertainty. That creates fear. The event continued like nothing had happened. Panels. Discussions. Networking. And my documentary. Still being talked about. I heard it again and again. Different voices. Different interpretations. Same conclusion. It felt too real to be just a concept. Exactly. By midday, I knew it was time. Not for another conversation. For the next move. I found a quiet corner. Opened my laptop. And pulled up everything I hadn't used yet. The messages. The patterns. The small details that didn't make it into the film. Individually, they didn't look like much. But together, they told a story no one could ignore. I didn't rush. Every word mattered. Every sentence had to be precise. Clear. Controlled. This wasn't emotional. This wasn't impulsive. This was calculated. I started writing. Not a story this time. A report. Structured. Professional. Impossible to dismiss as imagination. No exaggeration. No assumptions. Just patterns. Timelines. Behavior. And most importantly, consistency. Because one incident can be denied. Two can be questioned. But a pattern is different. Hours passed without me noticing. The noise around me faded into the background. Until finally, it was done. I read it once. Then again. No names. Not directly, but enough detail that the right people would understand. I attached the supporting pieces carefully. Only what was necessary. Nothing reckless. Nothing that could backfire. Then I stopped. This was the moment. Not the first step. Not the beginning. The point where everything changes. Because once you send something like that, you don't get it back. I thought about it for a second. Not out of doubt, but clarity. And then, I sent it. Not to students. Not to random people. To the people who mattered. The ones who couldn't ignore it. Even if they wanted to. I closed the laptop slowly. And for the first time since this started, I felt it. Not relief. Finality. Because now, it wasn't just between me and him anymore. Now it was bigger. Much bigger. The rest of the day passed quietly. Too quietly. And that's how I knew something was happening. Because when things stay calm after a move like that, it means the reaction is building somewhere else. I didn't look for him. Didn't try to track him down. I let the silence do its work. By evening, the first sign appeared. Not dramatic. Not obvious. But enough. He wasn't where he was supposed to be. A panel he was scheduled for. He didn't show up. At first, no one thought much of it. Things happen. Schedules change. But I noticed. Because yesterday, he wouldn't have missed it. Not for anything. That's when I knew. It had reached him. Not just the film. Something more. Something he couldn't control. That night, I saw him again. Briefly. In the hallway. He wasn't the same. Still composed. Still trying. But different. There was something behind his eyes now. Something restless. Like he was trying to stay ahead of something he couldn't see. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. Because the dynamic had already changed. Before, he was the one in control. Now, he was reacting. And I was deciding what came next. Back in my room, I checked my email. Nothing yet. But I wasn't expecting instant replies. Things like this take time. Time to read. Time to verify. Time to realize what it actually means. But the important part? It was already moving. And once something like this starts moving, it doesn't stop halfway. I sat down, thinking through the next step. Because this wasn't about waiting anymore. It was about positioning. Making sure that when the response came, I was ready. Not emotionally. Strategically. Because the final stage wasn't exposure. It was consequence. Real, unavoidable consequence. And once that began, there would be no version of this story where he walked away untouched. The next morning, everything finally caught up. The next morning didn't arrive quietly. It carried something with it. Not noise. Not chaos. But a shift that could no longer be ignored. I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I had to. Because I knew. Somewhere between what I sent, and the silence that followed, things had started moving. I checked my email before I even got out of bed. There it was. One message. Then another. Short. Professional. But different in tone. They had received the report. They were reviewing the material. They requested a follow-up. Careful words. But clear enough. It had landed. I sat there for a moment, reading the lines again. Not searching for reassurance. Just confirming what I already understood. This wasn't contained anymore. I got ready slowly. No rush. No urgency. Because whatever happened next was already in motion. The venue felt different that day. Not visibly. Not in a way you could point to. But in the way people paused slightly longer in conversations. The way certain names were mentioned with hesitation. The way attention shifted when someone entered a room. Information travels quietly at first. Then all at once. I didn't look for him. But I didn't have to. By mid-morning, everyone knew something was off. Not details. Not facts. But enough. Because uncertainty spreads faster than truth. I heard fragments again. Lower voices this time. More careful. Something's going on. He missed another session. Did you notice yesterday? Pieces. Disconnected. But forming something. And then I saw him. Standing near the far end of the hall. Not talking. Not engaging. Just there. For the first time since I'd known him. He looked out of place. Like the environment he once controlled was no longer responding to him the same way. People noticed. They didn't avoid him completely. Not yet. But there was distance now. Subtle. Measured. The kind of distance that grows once doubt enters the room. Our eyes met for a moment. And in that second, everything was clear. He knew. Not just about the film. About everything. The report. The patterns. The fact that this wasn't going to disappear. There was no anger in his expression. No confrontation. Just realization. The kind that settles in when someone understands. They can't control what happens next. I looked away first. Not out of fear. Because there was nothing left to prove. The rest of the day unfolded exactly the way things like this always do. Quiet actions. Invisible decisions. People being called into private rooms. Conversations behind closed doors. No announcements. No public statements. But movement. Constant movement. By afternoon, he was gone. Not dramatically. Not publicly. Just gone. His name removed from the remaining schedule. His presence erased from the event. Like he had never been part of it. And that was the moment it became real. Not the film. Not the confrontation. This. Absence. Because reputation can hide a lot. But it can't survive without presence. I didn't feel victorious. That's what I expected, maybe. Some sense of satisfaction. Relief. Closure. But it wasn't like that. It was quieter. More controlled. Like finishing something that needed to be done. Not for attention. Not for recognition. But because leaving it untouched wasn't an option anymore. That evening, I went back to the auditorium. Empty this time. Rows of seats. A dark screen. Silence. I stood there for a while. Looking at the place where everything had started to shift. Where he sat. Where he realized. And where, for the first time, he wasn't ahead of the story. I didn't regret how I did it. Could it have been louder? Yes. Faster? Maybe. But louder doesn't always mean effective. Sometimes the strongest impact comes from something you can't immediately fight. A pattern. A realization. A loss of control. I packed my things the next day. The festival ended like any other. People celebrated. Exchanged contacts. Moved on to their next projects. And on the surface, so did I. But some things don't end at the same time as everything else. Because consequences don't happen in a single moment. They continue. Quietly. In emails. In meetings. In decisions made behind doors you'll never see. I never saw him again after that. No announcements. No explanations. Just absence. And sometimes, that says more than anything else ever could. I don't know if what I did changed everything. I don't know if it stopped him completely. But I know one thing. He walked into that room believing he controlled the narrative. And he left it, knowing he never did. Because in the end, it wasn't about exposing him in front of everyone. It was about making sure he could never be the same version of himself again. And that